Hi guys, it's Danny here from the Happy to Health podcast, and in this episode we discuss the overarching question, what is mental health? Obviously it's a massive topic. Me, Dan and Ben go into real depth on some different subcategories of mental health, how we can address it, how can we identify poor and positive, knowing the difference of each type of mental health. We think this is a really powerful conversation and we just hope you enjoy listening to it as much as we enjoyed going through it and talking about it.
Hi guys, how are we doing? And welcome to a very exciting episode of the Happy to Health podcast because this is season 3.
Wow.
Welcome to season 3.
Cannot believe
Season 3, you know.
I know.
Mad.
We're in a brand new swanky studio, if you can see this. If you're watching this, you'll see the brand new studio. What do you make of it, lads?
Quite the upgrade.
Yeah, it's a level up.
I don't think we've earned it yet. I'm quite intimidated.
I feel like we've nicked someone else's studio. Like, is this our studio?
Hopefully the content matches the new backdrop.
Oh, there's just so many lights. It's cool. If you're watching this, I hope you enjoying the new studio. As always, when it comes to the Happy to Health podcast, we like to introduce some of our own topics, something that we are passionate about talking about, as well as getting some amazing guests on. And one of the subjects that we wanted to touch today, which is kind of fed through all of our conversations anyway, and it is a part of the whole mission of our podcast, is mental health. So I know a lot of you will have been listening to this podcast and thinking, well, the guys talk about mental health, they touch on it quite a lot, but what actually is mental health? So we thought we would use this opportunity to educate you guys, inform you guys, but also have hopefully a fun and insightful and an uplifting conversation about what really mental health is, how we can help you guys with that, how we can help you speak to your friends and family about how you're feeling, but most importantly, know how you can live or lead a really happy and confident life on a day-to-day basis. So, Danny, I'm going to come to you first, mate. What is mental health, or what does mental health mean to you?
Ooh, it's a big question. What does mental health mean to me? I'll tell you what it used to mean to me. Mental health used to mean, God, don't let yourself go to the area where like mental health is becoming a part of your life, because it was like something I didn't really want to think about. It was something that I was aware of, and it was something that I thought if things were going good in life, I wouldn't have to think about mental health. That's how I used to kind of think about mental health. It's quite strange when you say it out loud right now, considering where we are and what we talk about and what we preach and that kind of stuff. But that was really what I used to see mental health as, something that if I was doing good in life, I shouldn't really need to really think about it. And fast forward to now, and we can sit here and say, well, mental health is just, what is it? It's a sum of our thoughts, feelings and emotions, which is completely neutral. We all have thoughts, we all have feelings, we all have emotions, so why should it be something we never talk about? So that's probably what it means to me. It's just our thoughts, feelings, our day-to-day kind of mindset, and something that affects each and every one of us on every single day of our lives, whether it be good, whether it be bad. That's probably how I'd describe it.
Great summary. Ben, what about you? What does mental health mean to you?
I don't know if I could follow that, to be honest. I think Danny's put it brilliantly, because that's exactly what I think as well. And I think just to add to it, I'd say it's a bit of a spectrum, I guess. There are feelings of obviously happiness and sadness, but when it comes to mental health, people just think it's about the sadness, it's about the lows, but mental health can be positive as well, which is what we talk about all the time. So happiness, confidence, high self-belief, that to me now, obviously educating myself a bit more about these things, is what mental health means to me. It's a spectrum, and it kind of fluctuates between happiness and sadness. So, or even anger, that is a sign of mental health, isn't it? It might not, it's only circumstantial in that moment, or it could last for a while. But I think it's definitely a spectrum of thoughts, feelings and emotions that fluctuate on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, because I think the whole point of having this conversation is because of the misinterpretations, and it's because of the negative connotations that surround the term mental health. And look, you know what, there's some amazing campaigns at the moment, movements, charities wanting to open up this topic and conversation and normalise this conversation, which is fantastic, but there just still isn't a lot of education there. It's the negative connotations that go when you say mental health. When people, when you say the term mental health, people immediately think of poor mental health, and they think of mental illness.
It's that word mental, isn't it?
Yeah.
People use the word mental and instantly think crazy. So you say the phrase mental health, you think crazy health.
Yeah.
You think unwell, you think sick, you think poorly, you think hospital beds, that kind of stuff. It's because of the association of the word mental meaning negative. And I think by default, we've interpreted mental health collectively as a really negative phrase. When actually, as we've discussed before on the podcast, it's something we all have. It's something that can be inspiring, can be positive. It can be confidence, it can be energy, it could be an uplifted mood. It can be all these things that are positive, but because we associate the word mental with mental health, by default, it's like become this negative thing. And I think that's half the problem we're fighting into. It's that redefinition of the word mental health.
Because it's used just so frequent in daily conversation, isn't it? Like, how often have we been talking either amongst ourselves or to our friends and said, oh, that's mental. Oh my God, that's insane. Like,
that's
crazy. I'm the worst for it. I'll be watching like football at home. Like, oh, that goal was mental. Or like, a really nice car driver's passing. Is that car's mental? Like, it's the language we use, isn't it? Like, we play a part in it. Well, I certainly do. We play a part in it ourselves, and this adds to it bit by bit to that kind of the incorrect definition.
That's it. We teach a course, and I think whilst I'm trying to educate people to not misuse mental health terminology, within one sentence I'll say mental, mad, crazy. That's sick. Why do we think that there are these negative connotations, or why do we feel that there's still such a lack of education around this? Because we find it so obvious, don't we? It's something that we talk about quite a lot, and we feel as, young men that, although me and Ben said we saw bags under our eyes this morning, which as a young...
I've had them for 10 years.
So Danny, as a young man...
I'm getting them.
We find this very normal to talk about. I find it comforting to talk about. I find it inspiring to talk about. And I think one of the issues with me is that it does hold so many negative connotations. It's seen as a sign of mental fragility, whether that's an athlete or whether that's in the workplace. That if you are struggling with your mental health, or even if you're having circumstantial poor mental health, that is a sign of weakness. That makes you unfit, in the exact same way that if a female was struggling with postnatal depression, previously she would have been seen as unfit, an unfit mother, not being able to look after her child, which is absolutely ridiculous because so many females go through this. Why do we think there's still so many negative connotations? Why is there still such a lack of education, do we think?
I think there's a couple of things. Well, you could go down a few different routes here. I think, first of all, just picking on what you just said about how we feel comfortable talking about this issue, I think a huge part of that comes from experience. Not experience with mental health per se, but experience in having these conversations. So through having conversations about mental health regularly, we feel more and more qualified, more and more competent, and more confident to have these conversations. And I think on the flip side, a lot of people don't like talking about mental health because they haven't done it before. It's inexperience, which leads to those feelings of like uncertainty, of doubt. Should I be saying that? Is that the right terminology? That kind of thing. And I think if we can have more people feel comfortable to talk about mental health, remind everybody how we've all got one and we're all qualified to talk about mental health because we all have one, I think bit by bit we can start to shift the conversation and help more people discuss it, and then by default help this bigger problem that we're facing in society. And I think what you just said as well was really powerful about how some people think that if you've got mental health problems that can be a sign of weakness, when actually if you're at a stage with your mental health where you feel comfortable enough to talk about it, that's actually a real sign of strength.
Yeah.
And if we accept the notion that we've all got a mental health which fluctuates, which is, as we all know, is a fact, we all have a fluctuating mental health by default. If you're not willing to talk about it for whatever reason, that could possibly be more of a sign of weakness than if you're willing to talk about it. Like, if anything, it's probably a sign of strength that you're willing to open up and talk. Not to say people who can't talk are weak, but it's ridiculous to think that by speaking about your mental health is a sign of weakness. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I think that's obviously changing with the times as well. The more movements there are, the more people that are willing to open up and talk about how they're feeling. But I'll be the boring guy to cast things back into history, right? And we'll not get started.
How long has that been? Like, we've been 9 minutes.
Welcome to season 3.
Bear with me. But
things have taken a turn for the worst.
I do have a point to this. If you actually look back into history, right, we'll not go down the rabbit hole of religious beliefs or anything like that, but any kind of mental disorder was a taboo subject because, I mean, depending how far back in history you go, you had witches being burned at the stake or thrown into rivers to see if they floated. That was probably, looking back on it, they might have been showing signs of mental distress or mental illness, but at that time, nobody knew what that was. Therefore, they thought they were witches, and then obviously people then being thrown in mental asylums for any kind of mental distress or mental illness. It was then built up to be this big thing, and then if you go down the religious route as well, pardon me, where people would think that their friends and family members were possessed by demons. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's all stemmed from that and compounded and built up over time that it's this taboo subject. Nobody wants to talk about feeling unnatural or not normal for fear of being discriminated against, for fear of being treated differently, or for fear of being locked up for the way that their thoughts and feelings are consuming them. So, see, I did have a point.
You did, you had a brilliant
we
point.
laughed, but I found it really fascinating.
I know.
Yeah, fair enough.
So I'm going to summarize a couple of things for individuals listening, and I'm going to tell you a story because I want to start talking again about misinterpretations and what we can do to change this. So to summarize, guys, anyone listening, we all have mental health. It's a mixture of both positive and poor. It's a continuous journey. It's not an end definition. Every single person listening to this podcast has experienced poor mental health. Some of you, unfortunately, it may have been for longer. For some of you, it's more maybe incidental or circumstantial or temporary. Now, that is different from mental illness. Mental illnesses are recognised conditions which may need more support when it comes to either a medical intervention, medication, or therapy, counselling, that type of thing. Now, some of the issues that I think we have, again, is, like we've discussed here, people thinking that it's a sign of mental fragility. People thinking that then that makes you unfit to work, to carry out your day-to-day tasks. One of the other misinterpretations, I think, is that the way that this is made in society or portrayed in the media, that if an individual was to be suffering so bad that they were to take their own life, that is selfish, if they've left friends or family behind. And another one that used to always get me was people saying, oh, but you would never know, or you could never tell, it was the happiest person in the room. And I'm sorry if this offends anyone, but I disagree with that massively, because there are telltale signs. There can be so many, and I feel it's on us as individuals to be able to read these signs, not to predict anything and not to assume people are struggling mentally. I knew a lad called Chris Mitchell, who's a footballer, a professional footballer, grew up with him, and he very sadly took his own life a few years ago. Now, I was with him a couple of weeks before this happened. We were at a party, bumped into each other. Obviously, we'd known each other from school. We're having a catch up and whatnot. Lots of other people here at this party. And I shit you not, I'm not saying this for effect, but I knew there was something not right. I knew for a fact. You could tell by his demeanour, you could tell by his body language, you could tell by some of the things he was saying was just hinting at sadness. And you could, not suggesting that you can tell by looking at someone if they're feeling suicidal tendencies, but I could tell in his eyes that he was struggling at that moment in time. And when that happened, and he sadly took his own life, it was traumatizing. The shock was still there, but I didn't feel, I could have done something. But I just knew. And I think for people to then sit in and say, you never would have known, I think that is a little bit of a cop-out. Of course, some people may not be expressing so many signs when it comes to their behaviours, but I think that is passing the blame onto that individual. And I think there's so much more that we can do on a day-to-day basis to read signs and reach out to people. What do you guys think of that?
I completely agree. And, if you look at it and peel it back a little bit and you say, you can never tell they were so happy. Try and investigate that for a sec. Ask yourself, why were they so good at hiding it? Why did they make it their own mission to make it really impossible for anybody to tell that they were struggling? Does that potentially suggest that the environment wasn't ideal for them to talk about their feelings? is that then something that maybe we could work on in there? And not to say that's something you should have done, Dan, but in general, if people are like, you know, really trying to hide their mental health, is that out of like embarrassment, fear of kind of humiliation, not knowing how it's going to be received? I think you're right. I think there is a responsibility on all of us to try and create an environment where people can feel comfortable to talk about their mental health, whether it be positive or negative.
Yeah. Ben?
Yeah, fully agree. And I think one thing we've chatted about before is the fact that there are so many campaigns to encourage people to open up and talk about how they're feeling, which is fantastic. But we flipped it on its head quite recently, didn't we, Dan? And we said, you know, well, what if it's that people aren't opening up, but they are actually opening up, but we're just not listening, or people aren't listening, or know how to listen, or know what to look out for, or are hearing these things and noticing these things, but then not knowing what to do with that information, not knowing what to say, not knowing how to handle that situation. So maybe there are warning signs out there. People are opening up in certain ways that aren't a direct distressed call for help, but they're subtle hints of like breadcrumbs leading you to think, shit, this person's struggling.
I don't think people aren't opening up. Again, you framed it there brilliantly. I don't think people aren't opening up. Some people won't be, but a lot of people are, and it's that we aren't listening.
I saw a really powerful quote. I think it was from Jay Shetty's podcast. Shout out to him because his podcast is amazing. I think he shared a quote on his social media, and it said something along the lines of, those who need the most love show it in the most unloving ways. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, wow, the people who not just love, but people who maybe need to be communicated with, people who are desperate to share their emotions, they're not going to come up to you and say, hey, please can I tell you how I'm feeling? 9 times out of 10, it might come from they're being distant with you, or they might be rude to you, or they might, you know, act out of character. And we might interpret that on the surface as, oh, sod that guy. You know, he's changed, or, you know, and we can, on the surface, like maybe get away with that kind of behavior. But if we delve deeper, we are actually responsible for investigating that kind of behavior and saying, look, that could potentially be a sign of them struggling. Let's reach out. Let's try and create this environment, like I said before, where they feel comfortable enough to just come to us directly and say, look, I'm struggling.
Yeah. When it comes to the individuals potentially wanting to reach out or trying to reach out, and us potentially not listening, do we think it's maybe because of, we may see it differently because we're young men, you know, groups of young men, you know, will act differently, we'll have banter, you know, we want to go out and have a laugh. Again, I was at another party. I'm going to sound like such a boring bastard or a weird guy that I'm going to parties and just like analysing people's behaviour.
You don't sound like it, you are. Like, this is you.
Just sitting in the corner.
Dan's got his own room in the house somewhere, at the chair, like just interviewing people.
I've got my podcast headphones on.
This studio is actually modelled in Dan's bedroom.
And moving swiftly on, and there's a guy, and he's wanting to, I'm at a party and he's wanting to reach out to me, and granted he may be doing that because he knew who I was, he knew about the mental health PT and the work, etc. But he was trying to the whole night. He was trying to grab me for a chat. He was trying to speak to me. And because it was quite a small party, everyone was like in the same room. And one of his mates the whole time was just, shut up. Oh, come on. Like, we're at a party. Doesn't matter. Blah, blah, blah. Don't bore Dan with that type of stuff. And that's when I first came up with that concept. I was like, fucking hell. I was like, it's not that people aren't talking. It's that we aren't listening. Do we think that's because of the connotations around it, negative connotations, that person is bringing the mood down? Because when we teach our award in mental health and exercise coaching, one of the narratives that I've wanted to totally flip is that talking about depression is depressing. That's what people think, right? Talking about our mental health brings the mood down, or talking about poor mental health brings the mood down. But talking about our mental health is an inspiring thing, because with poor mental health comes struggles, comes overcoming those struggles, comes through, you know, getting yourself out of bed when it's the last thing that you want to do. So we find that inspiring topics. Why don't other people? Another example as well is, Danny, me and you were at Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO, a couple of weeks ago, which was fantastic. And during the intermission, there was a break, and at one point during the show, Stephen Bartlett talks about his best friend and business partner at one point was having suicidal tendencies and was thinking about, driving in front of a train. And then Stephen Bartlett went on to talk about how he turned his life around, how they had this intervention and they had this moment of incredible courage for him to get out this dark place and then see the light at the end of the tunnel. So we are sitting there in awe in the audience being like, that's incredible. What a story to celebrate. And this guy came up to me and Danny in the intermission, who was bothering Danny, and he was just like, this show's a bit fucking depressing, ain't it? Talking about jumping in front of trains. And we were just like, no, you've misinterpreted this. Is it because of this attitude that we have these issues?
I'm still in shock about that comment, to be honest. When I was just like, oh no, you're missing the trick. You're missing the whole point. I think it's due to a few reasons, but I think fundamentally it comes down to that. Firstly, we need to redefine mental health, and then by default we have a different understanding of what it means and what it means to discuss it. So if we redefine what mental health means, it can be positive, it can be negative. So by default it can be inspiring, it can be motivating. Then when those conversations arise, whether it be on Stephen Bartlett's tour in front of thousands of people, or whether it be in a podcast studio, or whether it be in the pub with your best mate, it can be a topic to be courageously kind of navigated, and we can talk about it and embrace it, because yes, it can be difficult, it can be a struggle, but on the flip side it can be amazing. And that's the same with anything. You can talk about sport or music or books or anything, and it can be bad and it also can be great. So we don't shy away from talking about it, but unfortunately the common perception in society, or at least a lot of people perceive at the minute in society, that mental health is just a negative thing. There's no potential for positive. It's just like you talk about mental health and it's going to bring the mood down, like you said, like that guy in the party who's, shut up mate, don't bring this up now because you're going to dampen the mood. That could have been in a really inspiring conversation, and you could have left that party feeling uplifted.
Yeah.
He could have felt absolutely incredible after speaking to you and having some advice. A massive weight could have been lifted off his shoulders. Yeah. And that could have been an incredible conversation, which he was deprived of because of this unfortunate definition of mental health that we have swimming around in society today. Yeah. So I think a huge part of the problem is this current definition, the working model that we're dealing with, trying to unmingle it and unwind it and redefine it. And then that's the new model. I think that's probably the best way to go about it.
I think the ironic thing as well is that a lot of people who don't, because there's people that don't even believe in mental health. So the people that don't believe in it and the people who don't talk about it, they're the ones, ironically, that are going to leave themselves to become potentially more vulnerable. They could be then more susceptible to poor mental health because they aren't aware of it. They won't see the warning signs. They won't be having conversations about it. And they'll be bottling it up.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think from my point of view, just to add on to what Danny's saying, I think there's this narrative that people in society, myself included at one point, was telling myself and ourselves that I'm not equipped to deal with that or have that conversation. And now I've changed my perspective on that, because obviously I'm not a doctor, I'm not a counsellor, I'm not a psychiatrist, clearly. And there's a place for them. They're doing fantastic work.
You've given me the best therapy in my life than anyone else, though.
Thank you.
Just when I've done stupid shit or I've had, stuff going on, not anything serious. I'm very fortunate to say that, but you would be the one that would then educate me or go tell me to read a book and stop playing a victim and all this type of stuff. So
thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And I think, like you said, I'm not any of those things, but I feel like I can give support and advice based on my past experience. So I think there's this narrative that at one point I was guilty of and said, I don't know how to handle that. I can't have that conversation. I'm not qualified. Clearly, I'm not qualified to diagnose. I'm not qualified to write a prescription. I'm not qualified to give that level of support. But what I am qualified to talk about is my mental health, based on the fact that I have mental health. Like you said at the top of the podcast, Dan, everyone has mental health. Therefore, we're all qualified to talk about it. The example that we give on the course before is, at any point in our lives, we've probably all given relationship advice to a friend or a family member. But that advice is given based on the fact that we've all had experience of relationships. does the same not apply to mental health? Because in that situation, when you're given relationship advice, you're not a qualified marriage counsellor. You don't go, oh, I'm not qualified to give that advice. You do it anyway because it's based on your past experience. Mm-hmm. So that should empower people to think, well, if I've got mental health, I can talk about my own thoughts, feelings and emotions, and I should be able to talk to my friends about my thoughts, feelings and emotions, as well as their thoughts, feelings and emotions. Let's just break that down and see it for what it is. We've all got it. We can all talk about it.
Just a question to you both. Mm-hmm. Do you think partly why we don't feel qualified to talk about it is because some of the kind of conversations surrounding mental health, like therapy, are these seen as like luxuries in society at the moment? Like if you can afford it or if you've got time to, you can tend to your mental health. Do you think that plays into why we feel like we can't talk about it?
Definitely, there's a lot of things in play, and I think it is that people feel as if, because again, it's because of the lack of education. Because if people think, oh, if you've got poor mental health, oh, that's something that's incredibly serious, you therefore need to go and seek professional help or get medication. Whereas actually, there's so many earlier interventions that all of us can have through conversation. And look, I say this all the time. I am not suggesting that we don't need mental health professionals. Of course we do. Right? We do need that, but we need them more for when potentially poor mental health is getting a bit more serious, or for mental illness. When it comes to circumstantial, temporary, poor mental health, which is what a lot of people throughout the world are struggling with at the moment, when it comes to that, we can solve a lot of that through holistic means or conversation, spending less time on your phone, getting outdoors, exercising, speaking to friends and family, right? Having that difficult conversation that you're putting off, doing things that help you de-stress. These are all things that we can do. But because people think, oh, I have to then go and speak to a mental health professional about it, we then won't be having these conversations. And then that means that people aren't going to be reaching out as much, potentially because of price. And look, I don't know what the answer is, but there's so many more conversations that we can be having where we could be nipping this in the bud so much earlier and so sooner. And that is one of the arguments that I have got involved in online, because I'll normally leave it. But when people have criticised our movement, and when it's been mental health professionals that have criticised our movement, one of the things that they have said is, you've not done X, Y, and Z training. And I said, I don't need to have training to have a conversation. The other thing they've said is, well, you wouldn't believe the amount of people that have come to me and their situation is worse because their friend or family member has given them bad advice. Fuck off. No, I'm sorry, but no. A lot of the things that we can have conversations about aren't going to be that serious, and we can all have them, and we don't need a degree to have them. And it's better having that conversation, even if you don't respond, even if you don't reply to them. It's better having that conversation and giving them an opportunity to speak potentially about what they're feeling about for the first time ever.
Exactly. What's the alternative there? You don't have a conversation. They don't get the help they need. Where does that end up? Do you know what I mean?
The problem just gets exacerbated, doesn't it? I think it's that lack of understanding again, isn't it? It's like, even before kind of I met you guys and sort of the couple of years running up to meeting you guys, I didn't even consider that there was a step before mental illness. I just thought you're either sweet, life's sound, or you're mentally ill, you need professional help. I wasn't aware there was a step before just called circumstantial poor mental health, during which things can be helped through conversation and exercise and these kind of things. Of course, I would have had poor mental health myself, but I just wouldn't have realised. I probably would have swept it under the carpet, or probably just pretend it didn't exist. I would have just thought, I'm either really sweet, life's good, or if it gets so bad, I'll have to seek professional help. And I think that's probably where a lot of people find themselves, in that kind of similar frame of mind of, I've either got a really strong mental health and things are great, I ain't got to think about it, or it's hospital beds and that kind of stuff. I need medication and professional help from therapists and that kind of stuff. And I think reminding or kind of educating people and explaining to people that there's a step before mental illness that's just called poor mental health, where we all drift in and out of sometimes. I think that really gives people the confidence to address it in a more, welcoming way, rather than being potentially offended and then getting defensive by it and being triggered by it and being like, oh, I'm a professional and this is like threatening to me and my industry and that kind of stuff. If we recognize that there's a stage before mental illness, that's just called poor mental health, where we all have it sometimes, including professionals, including therapists, psychotherapists, all these people, they all will have poor mental health at some stages, then I think that's going to help alleviate the problem a lot.
Yeah, 100%. And if you actually think about that example you've gave, I think you've put it brilliantly. The medical professionals and the mental health practitioners operate in the stage of really bad mental illness. Some will obviously operate in the area of poor mental health, but the way you've just framed that, Danny, is brilliant, because that stage where we fluctuate in and out of poor mental health is the stage that all of us are operating in, and therefore it justifies us having the conversation, because if there isn't anyone in that stage that's willing to talk about these things, people will either then start to be pushed more towards the right, down to the mental illness route, where these services are swamped and overwhelmed with waiting lists and might not get the help that they need. Whereas if we all educate ourselves about this intermediary stage that we dip in and out of, some people might stay in it longer than others. Some people might never step into it. If that's the area that we all operate in, then that's the area we should all be having conversations in.
Yeah, and I don't want anyone to think that we are bashing the mental health sector and saying that we can do it for them. It's not that at all. But and I get why a lot of mental health professionals, say for example a therapist who is dedicated her whole life to do it, went and got the degrees, has honed her craft and is spending every single day helping people, then if I'm to show up acting disruptive and saying, well, I can help too, I get it. And I'm not saying they feel threatened, not at all, but I get why they would then potentially worry about the safety of the individuals that we're working with. But what I'm doing is I'm not trying to replace that, or we're not trying to replace that. We are trying to ease some of the pressure, like you said, and actually have these earlier interventions before this happens and before it does get more serious. But I think the other issue as well is it is this kind of white collar approach when it comes to mental health professionals. If I'm struggling with something, who am I going to go speak to? I would rather go and speak to one of you two than go and speak to my doctor about it. And that's not saying anything bad about my doctor. That's me saying that you two are more relatable. You would probably be able to be more open and honest with me. You'd be able to understand my lifestyle as well. And I feel that it's the lack of that maybe connection, or that initial connection, or that relatability that's maybe putting people off going and seeking the professional help. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, just touching on what you said, I think that's the ironic thing, isn't it? That we've already mentioned there's so many campaigns and movements to get people to open up. And then on the flip side, you've got other people that are saying you're not qualified to have that conversation with somebody that's opening up. Like, what is that? And I totally get that, Dan, because, yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'd much rather open up to you guys about how I'm thinking or feeling than go and tell a stranger, or all right, I might know who my doctor is, but I see them less than once a year. I'm not going to go down that route and open up to them about that. I'm going to open up to my friends. I'm going to open up to my family members. But if they don't know how to have the conversation, that's where things get a bit tricky, which obviously brings everything back around to what we're talking about here, is everyone needs to be educated and empowered to know that they can have these conversations. Yeah, you're not qualified to diagnose or prescribe medication, but you're qualified to have a conversation.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. It's that we all need to be more educated, but then I feel as if there needs to be, look, and I know this is going to end up getting a bit of a backlash and people think we're being controversial, and we're not being intentionally disruptive. We're genuinely wanting to help, but I think there needs to be less red tape around the mental health sector when it comes to poor mental health. I know an individual that I was speaking to who's got a social enterprise, a community interest company, and he's a trainee doctor, and his company revolves around going around and teaching doctors how to be more relatable. So we did joke about saying that, like, someone would go into the doctor, he's sitting there with a snapback on, tracksuit, he's like, yo.
Batman posters on the wall.
But we joke.
I don't know if I trust that doctor.
but he realised through being a trainee doctor that there was too much red tape, and there wasn't that relatability there, which I think is key. But I want to jump onto another topic. people are maybe sitting listening to this and thinking, right, okay, I'm starting to understand this more, I'm starting to learn more, but they might not understand about their own emotions with poor mental health. So I'd like to bring up that topic, and not to scaremonger, not to make people worried, and not to informally diagnose every single person listening, but causes of poor mental health as young adults or anyone. Things can happen on a day-to-day basis. I'm going to bring some up, and then I'll invite you guys to chat about one or two of them. Stress, massive one. Stress compounded over time when it comes to work, our social groups. Another one, traumatic experiences throughout life. Family bereavement, we're all going to lose someone. Failed relationships. Relationships are some of the most toxic, confusing, traumatic, especially breakups, traumatic things that we got through, yet people are scared to put a lot of emphasis on that, having a breakup with someone, because people are like, oh, fuck it, everyone goes through it, just get on with it. Without realising that, yeah, we all go through it. So actually, rather than taking the emphasis off, we should all be able to have skills and training to understand how to deal with that. And then another massive one that I used to discover when I was a personal trainer, so many people would come to me and they would be struggling mentally. And I'd ask them what they were doing on a day-to-day basis. And I would say one thing, when was the last time you did something fun? Or when was the last time you did something to enjoy yourself? And they couldn't remember. And I used to joke, I'd make it a joke, like, oh no fucking wonder you're miserable then, like, come on, like, you're not doing anything that you enjoy, you're not doing anything that's fun. And a lot of people will think that people who are struggling mentally don't see fun and don't see happiness in situations. My argument is that although that can be the case with people who are chronically depressed, it's not necessarily that these individuals aren't seeing fun in certain situations, it's that they're not doing anything that's fun. That's my opinion. As someone who's potentially not a mental health professional, but that's what I see on a day-to-day basis from dealing with lots of different people. What sort of things do you guys notice on a weekly basis that doesn't trigger really serious poor mental health, but will damage your mental health or potentially isn't positive mental health?
Ooh, first one that comes to mind for me, and it's an obvious one, but I'll try and unpack it a little bit, is being on my phone or technology too much from when I first wake up, in contrast to when I get my body moving. So I'll explain a little bit. So I like to wake up and exercise pretty quickly from when I wake up. Not because I love working out or I love training, but I like to get my heart racing, heart moving. It wakes my brain up. I think if I don't exercise pretty early on in the day, I tend to stay in that kind of slower mind state throughout the rest of the day, and it affects my work. If I wake up and I go straight on my phone and I'm on social media and I'm browsing and whatever, scrolling, and that coincides with me not exercising relatively early on in the day, that definitely contributes to nothing crazy, but poor mental health. And that can sometimes connect days together and can gel a week together where I've had a poor week and I'm feeling anxious, and a massive trigger of that is when I feel like my mind, and again to quote, I think again Jay Shetty, I'm going to steal his quote again. I think it's when your mind and your body are out of sync. So if you're like 100 miles an hour type person and you can wake up and exercise and be on the phone taking calls and Zooms and you can do everything 100 mile an hour, and the speed at which your body and your brain is going is relatively similar, you can probably hack it without getting too bogged down with anxiety. You might burn out eventually, but in terms of poor mental health and anxiety, which is what I'm kind of discussing, what I've suffered with sometimes, you probably won't suffer from that, from my experience. But also, what I found quite commonly, now I try not to do it, is if I wake up and I'm on my phone for more than like literally 3 or 4 minutes, I'll just stop, I'll just turn it off. And it's like that really kind of powerful thing, what he mentioned on the podcast was, no one in their right mind would wake up. Imagine this scenario, you've just woken up, the curtains are closed, you're in your PJs still, eyes aren't even fully opened yet, and 100 people just walk through your bedroom door. Imagine that for a sec. You would be like, get the fuck out of my room. Like, what the hell are you all doing in my room? Get out. So why did we do it on a digital sense? Like, why did we wake up half asleep, open like Instagram, and just take in hundreds of pieces of information and opinions and judgments and
people you probably don't even like or care
people we
about.
might not like or exactly. And often the things that we're looking at aren't just like people saying good morning, how are you? It's like triggering stuff, it's controversial stuff, it's raunchy stuff, it's stuff that might be toxic for our mental health, and we access that within seconds of waking up. And I think I've been I want to say a victim, but I've suffered from that and the effects of that. And then when that coincides with not exercising as well, it really shifts the scales, and I'm like, oh, I feel really kind of, I just don't feel great, to be quite honest. It just doesn't make me feel great. So I try to limit the digital stuff for the first couple hours of my day, try to exercise in the first couple hours of my day. And then when I open the doors to let the world in, the 100 people, I'm much more prepared. I'm in a better mindset. I'm in a better frame of mind to deal with the inevitable toxic stuff, the inevitable triggering stuff, because you can't change that. That's always going to be there. But what we do have control of is preparing ourselves and equipping our brain with the tools to be able to deal with all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant example as well, because I think everyone listening can relate to that. And then you've given the solution as well. Ben, what about you? When will you notice that things are maybe taking a very slight dip? Because on a personal level, I know how calculated you are. That sounded menacing. I know how...
He's a calculated historian.
To give you a little bit of context,
Wow.
when I try and plan something, my mind's all over the place. It's in a million different places. Ben's is firmly in the one place. We'll strategize things to a T. So the reason I'm bringing that up is not to say that then you wouldn't be full victim to struggling mentally, but just because you do map out things and you are very cautious and calculated. And what things do you notice, or what things do you try and do to make sure that there aren't a dip? Give us some.
Is this where he pulls out a graph and explains how he did it? Well, I've actually analysed this over the last 10 years. I did a meta-analysis of my own.
I can't believe you stole my bit. No, well, thanks for providing the context there and steering away from making me sound like a serial killer or something. And I know exactly what you mean, because I do like a plan. I do like to strategize. I do like things. So I think for me, I notice when I'm struggling a bit, not massively, is when I get distracted. I'll spend more time on my phone. I'll find something else to do. That is when I feel, that's when I start to feel, I think that's the trigger, when I start to feel maybe a bit overwhelmed or feel like I've got a bit
fallen off the plan.
Yeah, I've fallen off plan.
Okay.
Or I don't know the next step of the plan. I'll go on the phone and I'll scroll, or I'll go in the news, read the news and think, oh, if I'm looking at the news, I'm taking in current affairs, when actually I'm just trying to either avoid doing something I don't want to do, or avoid getting back to actually figuring out how to get past whatever it is I need to get past, if that makes sense. So I'm hyper aware of that now. I know when I start scrolling, I think, right, shit, I'm going to have to do something. So my remedy for that, when I know I've fell into that pattern or down that path, is to go, right, I'm going to take the dog out for a walk. I'm going to get some fresh air, reset my thoughts. And generally, I'll be halfway around the route when I'm walking the dog and I'll think, right, that's what I need to do. Or, right, now I know how to get past this. Or, right, that's the next step that I need to do. And then I'll pretty much race the dog back to the house to make sure I don't forget it, because 9 times out of 10 I then forget it on the other hand and end up back where I was and then have to take the dog back out again. No, I'm only joking. But I think that for me is definitely the trigger. I'll distract myself by going on my phone, putting the telly on, going downstairs, try to chat shit to Kirsty when she's trying to concentrate on something and annoying her, end that up in an argument, or go and make a coffee when I've just had one. You know, that for me are the telltale signs where something isn't quite firing in my head. So my remedy, now that I know that those are my telltale signs or triggers or whatever, I'll go for a walk, and that resets everything for me. I come back with much more clarity, much more focus, much more energy, I guess, to then tackle whatever it is that I need to do.
Can't beat a good bit of time with a dog.
Oh, love it. We'll need to bring the dogs in for an episode.
That's a brilliant answer as well. And the reason that I asked that is because I know you have a plan. And a lot of the time when we're telling people how to improve their mental health. We say, right, have a plan this, plan in your exercise, plan in your nutrition, plan in getting outdoors, plan in quality you time. And the reason that then I want to use you as an example there is because you do a lot of that stuff and you have a plan, but then it's still fine. It's still okay. It's not always going to be perfect all the time. And then you actually then realize that because you have a really good routine, that when you're starting to fall off that routine, that's a telltale sign. But then I guess that is another point and another reason to have this routine, because then that is going to be a warning sign for you if you fall off it, which is gaining more self-awareness. I think for me personally, when I would start to notice it is when it's too late. And I'll be totally open and honest about it. I will. And it sounds so ironic and ridiculous because of the work that I do. But I am very obsessive about stuff. I can be a perfectionist with stuff, even though I know that I shouldn't be. And I do run myself into the ground. So the reason that I'm being so honest and wanting other people to try and relate to this is that you don't need to make the same mistakes as me necessarily. Don't try and do too much. Everyone thinks that we've got this like infinite pot of energy. And I always joke about this, like you're sitting down on the couch at night, absolutely fucked. You turn around to your partner and you're like, I'm done in. And you're confused. You're like, why am I done it? Of course you're fucking done. Like, you've not stopped. You've not stopped all day. We can't just keep going and going and going and going. We have to take tactical breaks. We have to switch gears between certain activities and focus on ourselves. So what I'd love to ask you guys to finish off, I've got a question for both of you. I'm going to tell you them in advance, so I'll give you time to think. Danny, when it comes to you, what things, I want you to let us know, what things would you suggest for individuals if they've listened to this and think, oh, actually, I do potentially struggle mentally every so often, whether it's on a daily basis, a weekly basis, every so often. What things would you suggest that they do? And Ben, what things would you suggest that everyone else does in order to identify things, or in order for us to be able to understand or identify if other people are struggling mentally? So Danny, I'll come to you first.
So I think first and foremost, I think you've got to investigate your own feelings before you take any action, before you reach out to somebody. I would even argue before you speak to a therapist, before you consult your best mate, investigate your own emotions. That'd be probably the first thing. And when I say investigate, I just mean kind of look in the mirror and maybe think, is this what my gut feeling is telling me it is, or is it maybe something slightly different? So sometimes you might be like, I'm so angry at this, this person made me so angry. But if you investigate it, it could be like you might be angry at something else, or you might be jealous, or it might be a different emotion going on. And if you investigate that, you can understand it more, and then you're more likely to be able to address the problem. So my first thing would be like, just spend a bit of time reflecting and investigating your emotions. That's something that has taken me years to get to that. It's taken me years to get to that point. It's not an easy thing. Sometimes you don't want to investigate because you kind of know what the real emotion is some of the time. But yeah, first one I'd say investigate your emotion, and then secondly, look at the close kind of circle you've got around you. It can be your mum, can be your dad, can be your brother, sister, best mate, barber, anyone who's willing to listen, who you feel like you can confide in and trust. And then think about whether it's worth bringing this thing up with them, because if it's, like we said, if it's poor mental health and if it's potentially circumstantial, then like we've discussed today, you're more than qualified to speak about it, and anyone who you can confide in and trust by default is also qualified to speak about it. Mm-hmm. So before you potentially run away with it and exacerbate the problem, it could be something that could be intervened and dealt with on a much earlier kind of timeline. If it's, let's say it's circumstantial, and let's say me and Ben fell out and I'm really struggling about that. Hope that never happens, by the way, bro. Let's say me and you fell out, Ben, and I'm really struggling to kind of come to terms with it. Maybe there's some regret in there for myself. Maybe I caused it. That could potentially, if I don't address it, lead to like a really serious poor mental health, potentially mental illness, who knows. But before it gets to that stage, I could talk to Dan about that, who maybe has fallen out with you once 10 years ago and I didn't know about it, and you patched things up and you managed to become a better friendship after that. I could get advice from Dan about that situation. That could really strengthen my kind of take on the situation, and then gives me confidence to go and patch up with you before we get to the point of seriously poor or maybe mental illness. So I think, yeah, going to the people around you in your close friendship group or family group and discussing the issue, if it's within the realm of poor mental health, I think that'd be my second step. And I think that, probably they're the two. And if that doesn't solve the issue and you feel like it's, if it's much more serious than that, if it's maybe, a bit more deeper than that, if you actually investigate the emotion and it's maybe a bigger problem, then seek professional help if you think that's what you need. Maybe confide in a parent or someone you trust the most and try and make a plan from there. Not everything can be dealt with by just talking to your pals. That's not what I'm saying at all. Some issues do need professional help. Sometimes the conversations that need to be had, maybe we're not qualified to talk about it because it can be like mental illness and it can be something that requires professional help. So that kind of links to the investigating your feelings. If you think that's the issue, then seek that help. And there's nothing wrong with that. No shame in that.
And I like the fallout thing because it's almost like a metaphor, isn't it? It's that if we're struggling mentally, it's a little bit of a fallout with our mental health, but it can still be repaired. We can still resolve it, but we want to have that early intervention and understanding before things get worse. Brilliant. I couldn't agree more with all of that. Ben, what can we do as society to do better?
It's slightly different from the original question you asked me. I think it would be education, first of all. Finding out a bit more about what mental health is. Obviously, the listeners will have a head start on that by listening to this, but actually maybe educating, what does that look like? How does it present itself in either myself or my friends and family members? And look out for warning signs or triggers in yourself and other people. So the example that I gave, I know what my triggers are when I'm distracted, I'm scrolling, I'm doing everything I'm not meant to be doing, basically. And then I put a plan in place to recover that. I think if we as society analyse what our triggers are, do a bit of analysis, love that word, I was going to get it in at some point, do a bit of analysis into what the triggers are that either have generated a thought, a feeling or emotion. What triggered that, right? Work that back. What caused it? Is there anything that I could do moving forward proactively to prevent that happening again? So for my example, maybe I should be more proactive in actually setting a time for when I'm going to do a dog walk. Go for a dog walk rather than wait till it's past that point where I'm like, shit, I'm doing what I don't need to be doing. I need to take the dog out. So maybe being more proactive rather than being reactive. And I think
that was smooth, by the way.
Yeah. Thank you. You'd think we've got a podcast. And then I think the next stage would be is looking out for triggers or warning signs in your friends and family members. Maybe looking at the way people react to things, the way people might not react to things. Look for people that might be withdrawn from certain situations, because I think that is a bit of a telltale sign that any friendship group in the history of the world ever has encountered, where make plans, somebody says, yeah, I'll be there, and then they're not there, and then everyone then ends up calling that person a dick for it. But that's the surface level reaction. Oh, fucking Jimmy never turned up. What an arsehole. Like, this has been in the diary for ages. Why don't we actually take a step back and think, well, what's going on with Jimmy? Why is he not here? Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it isn't nothing, but you can probably guarantee that there's something going on there that is prevented him from spending time with his friends. So I think as society, it's looking inward and then looking outward at trends and patterns in other people.
Brilliant. I love the causality part as well there, thinking about what is the cause and actually taking that time to trace those steps back when it comes to our emotions and feelings, because we don't do that. We don't spend enough time doing that. I think those are all absolutely brilliant examples. I've totally lost my train of thought. I was going to share something else and it was fucking gold as well. I can't remember.
You're too busy thinking about proactive, reactive.
Exactly what it was. I know. But no, I think as a whole, as society, we just need to think about our own behaviours a little bit more and think about what we say, think about when we make comments, think about if we're being selfish, thinking about if we're not thinking about the other person. Because what we need to remember, that if we are being critical of people, if we're gossiping, if we're saying things that are bad or nasty, that is damaging their health, but it's damaging our health as well. We don't feel happy when we do that. We are just feeding ourselves negative emotions that we are then not going to be able to recover from. So actually, us doing that to other people is just as damaging to ourselves. So I'd like to finish off just with a couple of things to point people in the right direction, potentially to support. And hopefully you've all enjoyed this podcast, and hopefully you've been able to see how informally we can talk about this and how it can be an inspiring topic. I hope it can. Hopefully you felt that way. Hopefully you can now feel comfortable going off and speaking to your friends, family members. If I was to give you a challenge, it would be to share this podcast with somebody you care about, or to educate them on some of the things that we've spoken about, the difference between positive and poor mental health, how we all have mental health, the difference between that and mental illness, some of the tactics that we can employ in order to keep positive mental health on a day-to-day basis. So that would be a challenge that I would love to give to everyone listening. If you have listened to this and you have identified that you may be struggling with things, if you would like some informal help, I would love to refer you on to mental health and exercise coaching. If you can find a personal trainer or a fitness professional in order to help you get physically fit, that is going to help with your mental health as well. And also, we were sponsored in a previous episode by an app called Mindler as well. And Mindler is it's an app where you can have access to mental health professionals. You can have a look at their profile. You can find one that you like the look of, that you feel you can trust, and you can open up a conversation with a therapist or a psychiatrist within the app in order to get some support if you feel as if you do need to reach out for that. You can go to mindler.co.uk. Besides that, lads, thank you very much. I enjoyed that as always.
Thank you. It's been brilliant.
We hopefully solved some of the world's issues. As always, guys, please, if you enjoy this episode, share it with a friend. Out of all the episodes that we've done, I think this is a really, really important one to share so that we can get this message out and help more people than ever before. If it benefited you, please give it a like, please share it to your stories, and we will really look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Cheers, everyone.
Okay, that's it. That's the end of the episode. Guys, we really hope you enjoyed that episode and that conversation. We love talking about this stuff, and for us, it kind of comes as second nature, but we also completely understand how some of the things we discussed are not easy topics to wrap your head around. So we really do hope that you managed to make some sense from some of the things we said. And if you did find some value in the topics discussed, please support the podcast and give us a share, whether that be on your story or whether it be reviewing the podcast. All the support means so much, and it means we can help more people. So yeah, if you found value, please help us, give it a share, give it some support, and we will see you in the next one.